Have you ever wondered why more and more people are saying that owning zero point 0.1 Bitcoin in 2026 could be more important than trying to buy one whole Bitcoin? If you're still thinking, what's the big deal about zero point 0.1 BTC? Then chances are you're looking at Bitcoin through an old lens, while the financial reality has already completely changed. Let's start with a very ordinary number. In the United States, the largest economy in the world, the median household savings is currently under $10,000. What does that mean? It means that for most Americans, 0.1 Bitcoin today is already equivalent to their entire life savings. Not investment capital, not spare cash, but everything they have after many years of work. And what does it take for an average worker to accumulate that amount? Extreme discipline, enough time, and most importantly, not being eroded day by inflation and the rising cost of living. That's why, in the current environment, 0.1 Bitcoin is no longer a small number. It is a serious financial milestone. In the past, everyone said, "I'll buy 1 Bitcoin later." But as we move into 2026, when 1 Bitcoin is approaching $90,000 to $100,000, the truth becomes clear. 1 Bitcoin is now far beyond the reach of 95% of the population. Not because they don't want it, but because they can't. The math hasn't changed. But investment goals must change. And in finance, especially in the US, the right goal is not the most impressive one, but the achievable one. That's when 0.1 Bitcoin becomes the new standard unit. Don't let the decimal fool you. 0.1 Bitcoin is not a fun investment. At its core, it represents ownership of a portion of the scarcest asset on the planet. In American finance, we have a very clear principle. A small position in the right asset is far more powerful than a large position in the wrong one. And when Bitcoin crosses $100,000, a psychological effect will appear, the psychological ceiling. At that point, 0.1 Bitcoin becomes a barrier most people no longer dare to cross. They say, the price is too high. I'll pass. Meanwhile, those who already own 0.1 BTC quietly enter a global financial minority. This is not a get-rich-quick story. This is a story about positioning. And in a world of increasing monetary instability, 0.1 Bitcoin may be the line between being left behind and standing firm in the future. If you've understood everything up to this point, then we need to say a truth out loud, one that very few people dare to admit. 0.1 Bitcoin is not an easy goal, and that is exactly why it has value. After many years working with investors in the United States, I've noticed a very clear pattern. Most people don't fail because they lack opportunities, but because they pursue the wrong goals. They set targets that are too big, too unrealistic, and in the end they achieve nothing at all. Bitcoin is no different. When Bitcoin was priced at $20,000 or $30,000, everyone said, "It's fine, I'll buy later." But when Bitcoin approaches $100,000, that mindset is no longer a strategy. It becomes procrastination with a cost. Because at that point, 1 Bitcoin is no longer an investment goal, but a luxury dream for most of the population. And this is when financial thinking must change. Not everyone needs 1 BTC, but many people need 0.1 BTC, and they need it sooner than they think. Let's talk about scarcity, real scarcity, not theoretical numbers. Bitcoin has a hard cap of 21 million coins. Everyone knows that. But what far fewer people consider is that a large portion of those coins has already been lost forever. Forgotten seed phrases. Damaged wallets. Owners who have passed away. And this number continues to grow over time. What does that mean? The effective supply is always shrinking, while demand moves in the opposite direction, constantly increasing. In this context, owning 0.1 Bitcoin is no longer just an investment. It is claiming a position in a globally scarce system. Worldwide, only a maximum of 210 million people can ever own 0.1 BTC. Out of more than 8 billion people, that is an extraordinarily small financial minority. In U.S. investment circles, we call this an asymmetric position. A position where downside risk is limited. Upside potential is disproportionate. You don't need Bitcoin to go up 10x to feel the impact. If Bitcoin moves from $100,000 to $150,000, 0.1 BTC increases by $5,000, simply by holding, without trading, without timing the market. And now we must talk about something even more important than the numbers. Psychology. When Bitcoin crosses $100,000, an invisible barrier appears. Most people will say, it's too late. Not because their analysis is wrong, but because they cannot overcome their own psychological ceiling. This is the moment when those who already own 0.1 BTC stay in the game. Those who don't quietly remove themselves. Financial history always repeats itself in this way. And if you look around the world, you'll understand why Bitcoin is more than just an investment. What has happened to currencies in places like Iran offers a clear lesson. Fiat money can collapse far faster than most people imagine. When trust in currency disappears, capital flows toward neutral, non-sovereign assets, and Bitcoin sits at the top of that list. That's why 0.1 Bitcoin in the future will not only be an asset, but a form of personal financial insurance. And the signs are becoming increasingly obvious. Bitcoin ATMs are appearing at gas stations, shopping centers, and residential areas across the United States. Businesses are beginning to prepare for Bitcoin payments and custody. This is not the loud phase. It is the quiet accumulation phase before expansion. Finally, I want you to understand this. The winners in Bitcoin are not the ones who buy the most, but the ones who buy early, correctly, and enough. And in the financial context of 2026, enough means 0.1 Bitcoin. But to truly understand why 0.1 Bitcoin really matters, we need to look at it from an angle that very few people talk about. Financial positioning within a system that is changing. In the current monetary system, you can work hard for many years and save consistently, yet the value of your money is still eroded day by inflation. This is not your fault. It is the structure of the system. And when the system enters a crisis, the first people to suffer are always those who hold cash. Bitcoin was created to address exactly this problem. When you own 0.1 Bitcoin, you are not just holding a number on a screen. You are holding an asset that exists outside the system, independent of central banks, impossible to print more of, and immune to short-term policy manipulation. This is why I always tell investors in the United States, Bitcoin is not for trading, but for holding as a personal financial foundation. And let's be honest, not everyone needs to become a Bitcoin millionaire. Most people simply need a financial anchor, something that helps them avoid being swept away when the system shakes. In that context, 0.1 Bitcoin is already enough to create a meaningful difference. A very common mistake I see among new investors is that they are always waiting for the perfect moment. They wait for pullbacks. They wait for bad news. They wait for confirmation. But in finance, time in the market is always more important than trying to time the market. The people who eventually manage to own 0.1 Bitcoin are not the smartest. They are the most disciplined. They buy gradually. They don't try to predict tops or bottoms. They understand that Bitcoin rewards patience, not emotion. And when we look toward the future, we have to acknowledge a simple truth. Bitcoin does not need everyone to believe in it to succeed. It only needs enough people to understand the value of scarcity, enough people who want to protect their wealth from monetary risk. As more countries face public debt pressure and trust in fiat currencies weakens, Bitcoin will not rise because of hype, but because it solves a real problem. And at that point, those who already own 0.1 Bitcoin will no longer need to chase the market. They are already in the right position. The most important thing I want you to understand is this. 0.1 Bitcoin is not the final destination. It is the doorway into a long-term game. Once you have a position, every decision that follows becomes much easier. You no longer feel pressured to chase price. You no longer fear missing out. You have a foundation. And in finance, a foundation always matters more than speed. And in the end, I want you to pause for a moment and ask yourself one very simple question. 5 years from now, do you want to be the person who already owns Bitcoin, or the person who wishes they had done it earlier? Because financial history always shares one common trait. The most important opportunities never look like opportunities while they're happening. They look like hesitation. Oh. And familiar phrases like, I'll do it later. 0.1 Bitcoin is not a promise of getting rich quickly. It is not a gamble. And it is certainly not a game for emotions. 0.1 Bitcoin is a decision. A decision to place yourself in a minority. A decision to choose discipline over delay. A decision to prepare for the future, rather than hoping the future will be kind to you. You don't need to believe Bitcoin will go to $1 million. You don't need to believe the financial system will collapse tomorrow. You only need to understand one very basic truth. In a world where money can be printed without limit, owning an asset that cannot be printed is an advantage. And once you truly understand that, zero point 0.1 Bitcoin is no longer small. It is enough. Enough to avoid being left behind. Enough to have a position while most people are still standing on the sidelines. And enough to step into the future with confidence instead of anxiety. If you found value in this video, please hit like so I know you want more deep, thoughtful analysis like this. Subscribe to the channel if you want to understand Bitcoin and finance with clarity. No hype, no FOMO. And leave a comment below. Backhand index pointing right. What is your current Bitcoin goal? Backhand index pointing right. Is 0.1 BTC part of your plan? We're not here to chase the crowd. We're here to understand the game before it becomes too late. Thank you for watching until the end. I'll see you in the next video.